first of all, to start with where we are right now within the health sector. So for the last 15 years or so, we have had relatively stable budgets within health, stable to slight increases on an annual basis. The last big fiscal crisis for the health and education sector, I know it better as the health sector, was in 2007, 2008, around the time of that big public sector strike. And we had a major crunch then and a decrease in budget. And after that, we have had relative stability in budget. Of course, we haven't had stability in health services necessarily, but we've had stability in terms of budget. But this year, actually since 2023 into this year, for the first time in 15 years, we are seeing a real and significant cut to the budget. And that cut to the budget is in the order of, between 5 and 10%, depending on how you measure the cut. I know the numbers best for the province, but these, of course, are across the country. And I'm not sure how much colleagues and comrades know about this, but within the last 12 months, across the board, health departments have been told to decrease their budget. Initially, within the province, the decrease was about R1 billion on a 33 billion budget. So that's a big cut. That was told to everyone in January of last year, and I'm giving you some of this detail to give you a sense of the climate in the health sector. Around about mid-year, when the wage increase was negotiated for public sector workers, a 7.5% increase was agreed to by government, but it was unfunded. What that means is when, so the province receives 93% of its budget from National Treasury, and it receives this money as an equitable share. And that equitable share is determined by assessing the number of people, so the population, and usually that covers the services and the salaries of everybody. So if you budget for a health system, let's say you're planning for the next year in your hospital, and then mid-year you are told, but we're increasing all salaries by 7%, which you need to pay, but we're not sending the budget with that increase. You can imagine what that means for the service is that you have an additional cut on an already cut budget. So that happened in mid-year of last year, and I'm anticipating that many of you know about that. And the result was that we have had not just a budget cut, but a budget cut without planning and austerity in a complete panic. I'll give you a sense of what that looks like. So in November last year, every single administrative non-clinical post in the whole health system was frozen. What that means is that if anyone leaves due to retirement, ill health, moving to another job, getting a training position, there's normal movement in the system all the time. Every single person who left a post, that post would immediately be frozen for all administrative posts. And that was a national directive. Within the Western Cape, there was an additional directive to freeze all clinical posts. That means physios, OTs, nurses, doctors, all clinicians across the board. So suddenly, if you had someone who left the position, you would come to work and find you're 3 instead of 5 people delivering the same service with no notification of the population, no change in the services that were promised to be delivered. So we are dealing with a very fragile system for certain in the Western Cape, but also in the country. So this is not just a provincial crisis. The Western Cape has, is this kind of on point? Is this interesting for people? Is this right? Okay. So the Western Cape decided to what they call land the budget line. Okay. So landing the Boeing on the budget line means they closed all the taps, right? All the posts were frozen, overtime, agency, everything. Other health departments throughout the country continued to fill clinical posts. So their crisis is a few months away. I think a similar crisis is coming, but they're not feeling it as acutely as we are here because their provincial departments have decided to accept that they're going to go over budget. And they will go over budget because the budget doesn't cover what they had planned for. So that is the nature of the current crisis and the current conflict that you're seeing and advocacy that's happening within the health system now. It's very much still got a Western Cape flavor, but that's because of this difference in the way that the budget cut is being managed. I am very sure that within 6 to 12 months, we're going to see exactly the same thing playing out in other provinces. Something just to say about that crisis as well around meeting the budget line. So the managers within the health system are not measured, their performance is not measured against health outcomes. It's not measured against how many people get an operation, how many people get medication, how long you wait in casualty for a bed, how long you wait for a CT scan. That is not how their performance is managed, is assessed. Their performance is assessed on their ability to come within budget. That's it. All the way up, from the head of health all the way down. That is how every institution is measured. And we've got to ask ourselves as a society what we are driving when that is our outcome measure. So when we say, as doctors and nurses, this is a disaster, what is happening? They say, but we're managing the budget. They're not actually managing the health service and the quality of the health service. So this current austerity comes on the back of a health system which, as you know, was already under strain. So within health, working class and poor people are affected in multiple ways. First of all, you're more likely to need to access a health system if you are unemployed, from a working class community, if you don't have access to good nutrition, water, housing, food, etc., education. So people from poorer communities are in greater need of health care. And that need is increasing. So I know that in the service that I deliver, we have not had an increase in the number of clinical posts for the last 15 to 20 years. And yet it is quite obvious that the population has grown, the population that we serve. So that can only mean that the quality of care that we deliver starts to go down. So this is the backdrop before the budget cuts. So people who need healthcare the most, we already have an inequality there. And then the structure of the health system is, in a similar way to education, is structured to protect the political and economic elite from these problems, because we have a public and a private system. And you know these numbers very well. So vast majority of the population, 84%, is managed by the public sector, and 14 to 15% by the private sector. And a lot of people pay out of pocket, so they pay money at pharmacies, GPs, and so on. And the public-private interface is, of course, the area that we are told NHI is going to address. If you would like me to, I can spend a few minutes just talking about unpacking that. So the GDP expenditure on health is 8.4%. It's not bad for a middle-income country. But half of that money is spent through the private sector. In other words, through private medical schemes, private hospital groups, and so on. There are 3 big hospital groups in the country that dominate 80% of the sector. So that's Life, Mediclinic, and Netcare. So those are the big 3. And the way that the private healthcare system is set up is as a fee-for-service system, which is an important economic principle as well. In other words, the more you come to use the system, the more money is generated, and the more income is generated, and the more profit is generated. So if you were dealing with a system which was not fee-for-service, people coming more and more to access healthcare would not necessarily be a bad thing. But if you have a private industry which is profit-based, which is fee-for-service, there is an underlying potential to over-service. In other words, to do procedures that you don't need to do scans that you don't need to do, to admit when you don't need to. So what this means is that in the public sector, we have a lot of people desperately trying to access services and getting very little. And in the private sector, we have a highly specialized, highly technical, highly hospital-centric system which encourages people to use the health system more and more. So a system that promotes health and prevention of illness is not going to be supported by a private sector industry in healthcare. And that's a really important point for us to know when we think about NHI. So we think about the kind of health system that is going to result in a healthier population. It cannot be a health system which relies on people being sick in order to make profit, put it very crudely. Of course, there are many people within the private health system who are doing their best, who are treating people to the best of their ability, and who are very compassionate. And many of them are there because there are no posts in the public sector. So you may have heard recently in the news that there are thousands of unemployed doctors in South Africa. Have you heard that on the air? And at the same time, we hear that we are so short of doctors. And you know, I think for people, you must be thinking, what is this? And what we're not short of doctors in as much as we are short of posts within the public sector. Funded employment within the public health sector is where our real crisis is. And at any point in time, we have about 30% vacant posts within the public sector. They are vacant and unfunded. So it's not just that people don't want to go and work there, it's that even if they want to, they can't. So those medical officers in KZN that were marching and doing a sit-in, they want to work, there is no post for them. So let's think about what the NHI proposal is bringing to the table. And I won't spend too much more time talking because I think it's nice if we have an interactive afterwards. So the NHI proposal is to pool all health funding into one fund. So to take all the money within the public expenditure for health and put that into one fund. Note that it's only public money. So it's the equitable share, conditional grants, and other money that we use for health. And to use that single fund to purchase, and those are the words used, to purchase healthcare from public or private providers. So what people have in their imagination is that you'd have an NHI card, which there probably will be. You have to be a South African citizen with an ID, which is a whole other conversation. You have an NHI card with which you can use that card to go to a private GP or to a private hospital or to a public hospital. A couple of points to say about that image of what NHI might look like. First of all, you need to go to the service provider within your area. So if you happen to live, for example, in Delft or Khayelitsha, the service provider in your area is very different to the service provider if you live in Pinelands.
Yeah.
Okay? The hospital that's going to give you care is very different whether you live in a rural community in the Eastern Cape versus whether you live in an urban metro. So saying that you can use your card in public or private does not automatically create more equity in the system. It doesn't give more access because we use the same pathways of care. That's the first concern. The second concern is, remember, the money that went into the NHI fund is public money. We are going to use public money to buy, let's say, 10 hip replacements from Life Hospital. Life Hospital is not part of the state infrastructure, it's not a public entity, it's a private enterprise. So we have to ask ourselves about where we're building capacity and where we may be decreasing capacity with this new plan that might be coming. So NHI may result in more equity, or it may result in a deepening of inequality if it doesn't address issues like urban-rural inequalities within metros, differences between poorer and wealthier suburbs. And there's a lot more to say about that. This is aside from the it's one fund, it's easy to loot, that whole conversation about corruption, I'm not even bringing in now. So what I'm saying is that NHI is almost like a blank check. And the way it's administered will determine whether it supports the public health system or provides profit for the private health system. And that depends on the ethical leadership that leads NHI and the frame with which they lead it. What is their philosophy? Is their philosophy that only a public health system can reliably and sustainably deliver health to the country and the nation and its people? Or do we think that we can outsource it? And at the moment, it's a blank check with NHI. We don't know which way it's going to go, and it depends on who the political leadership is going to be, and all of us in this room know what the political leadership looks like at the moment. Lastly, on NHI, you cannot have an NHI which succeeds on a failing public health system. So to talk NHI and sign off that bill and at the same time cut the health budget for public health is insanity. It doesn't make any sense. And it's, beyond disingenuous, it's a dishonesty towards the population. You're saying we're committed to universal health coverage, but at the same time, we are destroying our means to do that. Thank you.